Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation, Creating Age-Friendly States. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event. When you join today's webinar, you selected to join either by phone call or computer audio. If for any reason you would like to change your selection, you can do so by accessing your audio pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. You do have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. All right, I would now like to turn things over and introduce John Feather, CEO of Grantmakers in Aging and moderator for today's webinar. Welcome, John. You now have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us today. We know that some of our colleagues in the southeast of the United States are facing some very challenging circumstances, and our thoughts go out to them. But before we get started in this webinar, we want to thank, as always, the John A. Hartford Foundation for their continuing support of our Conversations with GIA webinar series, which allows us to provide this series free of charge to our listeners. Perhaps the most successful program to foster successful aging over the last decade has been the Age-Friendly Communities movement. It's hard to believe in some ways that it began just 10 years ago with the release of a framework created by a number of cities from throughout the world under the leadership of the World Health Organization. It provides a broad framework that includes 8 different elements. And for those of you that may or may not be familiar with the framework, the elements are transportation, housing, social participation, respect and social inclusion, civic participation and employment, communication and information, community support and health services, and outdoor spaces and buildings. There's a number of names for this program. It began as Age-Friendly Cities. It's now Age-Friendly Communities. But here in the United States, with the leadership of ARP, we talk about livable communities. But all of these things are in the broader process of trying to create a better community for all, including older people. As we often say, communities that are great places to grow up and to grow old. The WHO also developed a network of communities that wanted to formally begin work and a process to join the network. Over the past 10 years, 700 communities from around the world have joined this network officially, and almost 200 of those are here in the United States. As I said, ARP is the convener of this process here in the United States and has been very important in its development. What began as a program for cities has now encompassed communities of various sizes, and particularly in rural areas, whole regions. But what about larger geographic regions? With so many aging programs developed and implemented at the state level, does it make sense to try to create an age-friendly state? And that's our topic for today. We currently have 2 examples, New York and Massachusetts, and we are so pleased to have with us leaders from those 2 states to talk about the process and how philanthropy has been engaged. So I'm so happy to have with us today Nora OBrien-Suric, the president of the Health Foundation of Western and Central New York, Nora Moreno Cargie, vice president of corporate citizenship for Tufts Health Plan, and the president of Tufts Health Plan Foundation, and Robin Lipson, the chief of staff and chief strategy officer for the Massachusetts Executive Office of Elder Affairs. We want to welcome you all. As we mentioned before, we will have questions at the end of this presentation, and so you can type those into the question box you see on the control panel at any time, and I will be reading those to our distinguished panel later on today. So Nora from New York, let's start with you to talk to us about some of the developments in New York State and how the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York and other philanthropy in New York has been involved.
Thank you so much, John. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you today about our initiative, which we're calling Partnerships for Healthy Communities. First, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of the Health Foundation, why the Health Foundation is interested in participating in age-friendly initiatives in the state, and then to talk about that partnership. So the Health Foundation for Western and Central New York, as the name indicates, covers two regions in New York. One in Buffalo, in the 8 counties surrounding Buffalo, and then we have an office in Syracuse and the 8 counties in Syracuse as well. So that's 16 counties altogether, and we're divided by the 8 counties where Rochester is the anchor. We have a $128 million endowment at this time, and fortunately, that just seems to be growing. Next slide, please. So we advocate for the continuous improvement in health and healthcare. That's our focus. And we currently have 3 vision areas: older adults, children 0 to 5 who are impacted by poverty, and then helping to build the capacity in the organizations that provide services to these 2 vulnerable populations. This year, we've actually added 2 other vision areas. One is caregivers, focusing on caregivers of older adults. We have an endowment from the Lipson Foundation to support a new program officer in that. And then second, we have an advocacy goal, which more or less leads into what I'm going to be talking about with Age Friendly. The advocacy goal is that by 2027, everyone in New York State will have access to quality, affordable health care. Now, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we only cover 16 counties, but the board has mandated that we find some way in the next 9 years to ensure that all New Yorkers have quality, affordable health care. And the only way to do that is to really take a systems change approach, to look at how we can have collective impact, to look at public-private partnerships that we can leverage, and then to look at a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So looking at age-friendly New York, it covers all of those things. It is a community impact approach with a public-private partnership too. So we thought this was a good way to help us solidify our partnerships, to leverage the momentum already, and then eventually to be able to build on the partnerships and the momentum of age-friendly, and then work with the community partners in making sure that everybody has quality, affordable health care. After all, we are focusing on health. Next slide, please. So it all started actually in 2017 when Governor Cuomo, in the State of the State address, wanted to make New York State the first age-friendly state. And he said that he would do that through the Health Across All Policies initiative in New York State and through the prevention agenda. And this mandate from the governor is that all of the departments within New York State must include age-friendly policies and to also take a prevention approach. In the prevention agenda, the new one that will be starting in 2019, he has listed healthy aging as one of the top priorities in New York State. We've got the primary today, so we'll see if he wins again, at least in the primary, that we'll be able to continue in this vein. Fingers crossed. So the foundation last year wanted to help the governor's agenda be successful. There was no money at that time that was put into actually making New York State an age-friendly state, other than the governor's mandate that all of the departments needed to focus on what they could do to make it age-friendly. Next slide, please. So we thought that we should step in as a foundation and see what we can do in order to help the governor's agenda. Now, let me just say that because we focus on older adults and young children, that we did not adopt the age-friendly wording. We are calling it Partnerships for Healthy Communities. And as you'll see, this is our goal. We did take from AARP that our commitment is that New York State will be a great place to grow up and grow old. Anyone who knows that that is the language for age-friendly in AARP knows then that this is focusing on the age-friendly and the 8 domains, which John just listed previously. So in order to help the governor's agenda be successful, we devised a 2-phase approach at this point in time. Phase 1 is to subsidize an inside person in the Department of Health, and also to put in money to raise awareness. I'll talk more about those 2 in a minute. And phase 2 is to look at leveraging the momentum and what's already happening in the state, and then providing additional support. In order to do phase 1 and phase 2, we really needed to deepen our public-private partnership. And I'll just tell you a little bit about those partners. Naturally, it's the Department of Health, it's the New York State Office for the Aging, it's the Department of State through their Smart Growth program, and it is with our wonderful friends and colleagues at AARP New York State who are lending us a tremendous hand, and I'll tell you about that in a minute, and of course the New York Academy of Medicine, and I will explain that to you. We're really fortunate to be partnering with our great friends at AARP. They have been successful in lobbying the governor to look at age-friendly in New York State, helping to raise awareness about age-friendly communities and the benefits communities for that. And also partnering with AARP lends credibility to the movement, and they're able to provide the age-friendly information on how to start that. So we're able to tap into what they've already been doing and then to help leverage that. So thank you, AARP, Department of Health, New York State Office for Aging, NIAM, and Department of State. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. Next slide, please. So phase 1, we have 2 initial investments. Last fall, the board approved funding for a part-time person to be the project coordinator in the Department of Health to focus on implementing the policies that the governor wanted to see, health across all policies. And the second part of that was money to help raise public awareness. And we did this with our partner, AARP New York State, through their annual Livability Summit, which was held in Syracuse on the beginning of August, and the Health Foundation also funded a pre-conference meeting before the AARP Livability Summit, and it was very well attended. We were really fortunate at that summit to have a joint announcement come out because we were able to then announce phase 2 of this project, which is our public-private partnership with the Department of Health, New York State Office for the Aging, and the Department of State and AARP together, focusing on putting out a request for applications that's going to help develop New York State age-friendly. And in June of 2018, our board approved phase 2. Next slide, please. And phase 2 has 3 objectives. We're leveraging the statewide effort by working with the State Office of the Aging and the Department of State. They've put together $1 million, and the RFA, which will come out in about a month, is going to fund up to 10 communities throughout New York State at $100,000 each in order to incentivize developing an age-friendly community. They're also going to be funding 2 communities that have already started their age-friendly work to help them deepen their experience and become a region of excellence in age-friendly. Our partnership with them is to also provide funding for 3 communities to also deepen their efforts in age-friendly, to also be leaders and mentors to the new cohort of the up to 10 communities. And we're also providing funding to the New York Academy of Medicine to develop a learning collaborative. Next slide, please. And that learning collaborative is going to include providing technical assistance both in group and one-on-one, and conducting webinars and conference calls, and developing a project website. You may know that the New York Academy of Medicine is the organization that has started and helped with Mayor Bloomberg back in 2010 to make New York City age-friendly. So they have a great history, and they've got a lot of wonderful learnings that they're able to impart to these communities across the state. So we're really happy that we're able to support them. Next slide, please. The New York Academy of Medicine will also be looking at the measures on how we're going to measure success, and they'll be checking in on that at the baseline, the midpoint, and then for a final report, they'll be doing an evaluation. They'll be taking a look at what best practices we've learned over the couple of years of this initiative, which will be starting in 2019, and then they'll be disseminating that information so that other communities throughout New York State can learn and to adopt the methodology for developing an age-friendly community. Next slide, please. And so just to conclude, Our goal is to work with all the departments in New York State and our great partners in that, and to ensure that New York State will be a great place to grow up and grow old. At the end of 2 years, we will have at least 15 communities that are focusing on age-friendly initiatives, and that New York State will be an exemplar to other states in creating age-friendly. And we are so pleased that we are working jointly, well, in parallel with our wonderful friends in Massachusetts. So we're doing this together, and I just love it that my wonderful friend Nora over at the Tufts Health Plan Foundation and I can continue to work together on these two state initiatives. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nora, and thanks for that summary of the work that's being done in New York State and the role of philanthropy in it. Before we go to the Nora from Massachusetts, please remember that you can enter your questions at any time into the question box that you see on your control panel, and I will be asking those at the end of the presentations in a little while. So with that, Nora, Nora Moreno Cargie from the Tufts Health Plan Foundation, would you like to update us on on Massachusetts?
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Nora from New York. Good afternoon, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to talk about what our efforts have been in Massachusetts. I would say that unlike New York, which was governor-led, I think that we started with a bottom-up approach. One of the things that as a foundation we use as a principle for engaging is this idea of honoring community and where they are, asking them about how it is that we should proceed in any kind of effort that we support for and with them. And so we looked and saw a clear partner for us in these efforts. Next slide. No one, there we go. So when you think about our missions and our visions, one of the things that we decided was that we, having been a consistent funder of the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative, would be to do our work through that collaborative. One of the things that we did as part of supporting that work was to have them go through a strategic planning process, and then once we saw movement and momentum, refresh that strategy to ensure that as the landscape in Massachusetts was changing, that we would be relevant and would continue to ensure that whatever was happening in community would be the thing that we would raise up. And so if you look at our vision, it's really actually beginning to engage the older adults, recognizing their integral value to any kind of solution that we came up with, and then leveraging our collaboration to bring forth and continue to use those voices to inform our work. Next slide. And so using the Massachusetts Healthy Collaborative as a centerpiece for the work, I would say that we recognize very clearly, and my friend Nora in New York will remember this line from Hamilton, that this is not a moment, this is a movement. And so to be able to identify what was working and what was not working in that movement, we wanted to ensure that we would bring other folks to the table. We would increase the awareness and the urgency as well as their buy-in. During our pre-meeting, John was alluding to the fact that sometimes aging isn't necessarily the first and foremost thing on people's mind, but what we know is that everyone is aging. And so how can we bring forth that urgency as well as buy-in and alignment? And so as we were thinking about this as a movement, we understood that we could not do it alone. And so as we used this collaborative, which consisted of 100+ organizations, we recognized that it could be a great hub for our a healthy aging work. And then, not to be outdone by New York, I want to say that our governor turned 60 and everything changed. It was very exciting to see him recognize that as a man who was leading the Commonwealth, that he still had a lot to give and a lot to contribute. And so how can we unleash that power of older adults in a state that was growing older? And then really critical in this movement was also to bring others on board to help support and fund what was happening in community. So we're really proud that there are other funders sitting around that collaborative. Next slide. So, right, when you do work, we need to have strategies, and we need to ensure that those strategies are aligned with what we intend to do. And so for us, it was this idea of initiating behavior changes among policymakers, recognizing, especially with these recent primaries, that work is ongoing. As we see new players come into the arena, the political arena, we know that work is not done. We also recognized that we needed to develop specific asks. So in this case, I would say that AARP, who is mentioned a lot in this, and will be mentioned a lot in this presentation, I think, is because they are a strategic and key partner with us in how we think about changing the dynamic. And so recently, AARP stood up with Governor Baker to talk about housing and the critical place that housing plays in this age-friendly movement. And so I would say that in supporting the Housing Choice Initiative, what we can say was that there was this commitment to ensuring that we could create housing units that were affordable and accessible. And while that was not necessarily something that came out of the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative, what we knew is that it aligned with our work. And so we also stood with the governor to ensure that we could continue to look at policies across a lot of these domains. We also needed to create new champions. One of the things that we realize is sometimes when we sit around these tables that we're talking to ourselves. And so what's really important and critical is to think about who else needs to be at the table. Who else do we need to engage? And so we set a goal for ourselves to make sure that business was at the table, ensure that when we looked around, we also had first responders at the table, elected officials. I think one of the things that's really been exciting is to see some of the systemic impact that goal has had in terms of moving our agenda forward. And I can think of one particular example where the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative had started to do some training with the Mass Municipal Association to ensure that they understood what this meant and how they could start initiatives through the municipalities. And then this idea of capacity building. I think that Nora too alluded to this, and there's this idea that sometimes we don't know what local communities know. They know best where they are in terms of their initiatives and their journey. And so one of the things that we did as a foundation was that we created and just launched a Momentum Fund, which is a smaller grant program that supports communities in their age-friendly and dementia-friendly efforts. Next slide, please. So really key in our work is this notion of how we are engaging. And so when we think about engaging partners, we think about who are the right partners. We actually think specifically as a foundation, are we taking sufficient risks? And then are we holding ourselves accountable? Are we looking for specific results? And I think that in all of this, the lens that we want to do to make sure that we look at this work through is this idea of engaging diverse communities. Because and I say this often to my team, I don't want to be that funder where we're actually creating a greater gap between those communities that are underway and already have momentum and have resources, as opposed to those communities that don't. We were really excited to participate just yesterday in a press conference with Lawrence, one of our gateway cities, one of those cities in Massachusetts who's predominantly a minority Spanish-speaking community, and to see them create a cross-sector collaborative was really inspiring and exciting. And we looked around, that stage and saw our partners at the state, our local partners, and our AARP partners as well. Mike Festa, who is the director here, is amazing and wonderful and very, very wise in guiding us. A former legislator, he really gives us insight into how we should and can approach the work, especially as we think about partnerships. Next slide, please. And so here are some of the demonstrated successes that we see. I can say that when we started to move from a program specific direct service foundation to a systems and best practices, policy and advocacy investment strategy, that especially around this age-friendly work, we went from 3 to 5 age-friendly organizations in 2014 to today, seeing over 106 communities, municipalities, regions either take on this initiative or to think about this initiative with specific strategies or engage us in conversations around these initiatives. Because we do work in New Hampshire and Rhode Island, we're also seeing them have these conversations. And while no two states are created equally, we know that by showing and demonstrating the successes that we're seeing in Massachusetts, we can actually leverage what we learn in those other states. And so it's this idea of supporting communities as they think about these other resources, honoring and recognizing what makes them special and different, and then prioritizing this idea of closing the equity gap. Last slide. I think that's it for me.
Well, thank you so much, Nora, for that wonderful update and strategy around the work that's being done in Massachusetts. Once again, just a reminder that we will be doing questions at the end of our next presentation. So please go ahead and enter those in the question box you find on your control panel. And now we'll turn to Robin Lipson, who works in the Executive Office of Elder Affairs, to tell us a little bit more about the specific plans in Massachusetts. Robin?
Thank you, John, and everyone. It's a treat for me to be on the phone with both of my Noras, who we'll refer to as New York Nora and Massachusetts Nora, I think, for the rest of this conversation. If I could have my first slide, please. What you heard from Nora, Massachusetts Nora, is that our work started in the community and grew. It actually became so visible that it caught the attention of others, and the local work built interest in and momentum for larger statewide initiatives, which I will spend some time talking about. And I think one of the things that distinguishes Massachusetts is that we have leaders across multiple sectors, whether that's academia, philanthropy, housing, services, technology, who are committed to the age-friendly mission and vision. So we have alignment across sectors, which I think has propelled some of our work and added to our success here. So to Nora's point earlier about having the right partners, both Noras made this point. We think that's critical to what our strategy has been. And you see examples of some of the partners here. I'm sure that this is not an exhaustive picture. I know I've left someone off. But I have to express my deepest appreciation not only to these partners, but to the team at the Tufts Health Plan Foundation, which Nora leads, because they have focused on this work for 10 years. And their commitment to this work has transcended multiple state administrations, changes in leaders in many sectors, and I think their consistent focus has been a critical backbone to where we are today. Next slide, please. So you saw the numbers earlier on Massachusetts, Nora's slide, but we have more than 100 towns participating in some kind of age or dementia-friendly work here. And what I want to do is give you a snapshot of what the 4 major statewide and somewhat interconnected initiatives are. And I'll kind of start on the bottom left and move around counterclockwise. Nora talked about the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative. And one thing that I'm not sure she pointed out was that it had launched as a network of leaders in community, health and wellness, government advocacy, education, and philanthropy who wanted to advance healthy aging. And it evolved over time from what I called a think tank to a do tank. And it's really become the hub for supporting the work of local communities and regions in becoming age-friendly. Moving to the right across the bottom, dementia-friendly Massachusetts. We're not the only state who has a dementia-friendly movement. It's a grassroots movement to make communities safe and inclusive and respectful for persons with Alzheimer's or related dementias. We have made the important strategic choice in Massachusetts to embrace the AARP Better Together approach and to integrate our age and dementia work. We are thoroughly agnostic about where communities start. If they want to do one, if they want to do both. We have 3 communities in Massachusetts, Boston, a region, Cape Ann, which is in northeastern Mass, and a town in the center of the state, Marlborough, who are currently integrating their age and dementia-friendly activities. And we're in the process of working with all of our partners to create a toolkit that will help communities integrate this work. And that toolkit will include a checklist of features that define a fully integrated age and dementia-friendly community. So moving up above dementia-friendly Massachusetts, oh, I'm sorry, can you just go back? You see a picture of Governor Baker there. He is flanked by the co-chairs of his Aging Council, and the tallest woman in that picture is Massachusetts Nora, in case you need a point of reference. And so the third initiative I want to talk about was Age-Friendly Massachusetts. Governor Baker affirmed the state's commitment by announcing the designation of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to be among the first states in the nation to join AARP's State Age-Friendly Network. And what this designation does is it commits us to collaborate with partner organizations to make the state more livable for people of all ages. And it commits us to a process of continually improving where we are on those matters. And then the final statewide initiative is something called the Governor's Council to Address Aging in Massachusetts. This is a council that is tasked with advising the administration on policies, best practices, and other initiatives that would promote healthy aging in Massachusetts. Next slide, please. So to talk more about the Governor's Council, this was created a year and a half ago. The governor announced this in his annual address to the citizens of Massachusetts. The council is comprised of leaders from the business community, from academia, from healthcare, technology, innovation. We have caregiver experts, we have community organizations, we have municipal leaders. So this wasn't really a group of 24 experts in aging. There were some experts in aging, but by and large, these were people who were appointed to serve because they brought with them expertise and perspective from different domains and from different parts of the state. We have technology and bioscience executives, we have housing experts, we have business leaders. So what's interesting about this group is that when we started, we had little shared experience or common knowledge. So we spent our first year meeting in person, but we really spent our first year listening. So we met 5 times, and in several of those meetings, we had expert panels present on matters like transportation or caregiving or economic security. We traveled around the state to hear from people in community and what they had to say. And for those who couldn't meet us where we were, we invited them to provide input during a web portal. So we heard from more than 500 people throughout the state. And what we learned from them helped us draft an initial blueprint, which I'll share with you in a minute. In the second year, which is this year, We moved from the general to the specific and have created work groups to focus on the issues we heard the most about. And, you know, New York, Nora mentioned caregiving. That was one of the issues. Employment, people want to work longer. Housing, transportation, and we also created a work group on innovation. Next slide, please. We felt that we needed to have some kind of shared framework or way to approach this work on the council. So we decided very quickly that our framework was community. We decided early on that the unit of analysis would be people, it would be individuals and families and their communities. And you'll see kind of the four overarching principles in the blue boxes in the graphic on the right. It's no surprise that one of them is the development of age-friendly communities. Another is to facilitate connection and engagement. We heard over and over again that people wanted to have purpose, to be part of the community, and to be engaged and valued. We also heard about the importance of accessible and affordable services, most notably transportation. And we know we have to improve the economic security for many people in order for them to have a meaningful life in the community they choose. Next slide, please. So this is our blueprint. This is what our blueprint looked like at the end of the first year. I can decode this for you a little bit. If there's a red check mark, that means these things are well underway. If it says WG, that means that it is being more fully developed in a work group. And let me highlight just a couple of these for you. I'm going to start at the bottom. It turns out that one of the things we learned while we were on the road is that language is really important. And that people really think it is time to change the perceptions of aging and address ageism. So people asked us continuously if we could move away from the old language talking about the burdens and challenges of an aging society. So as a result of that, we're going to move forward and do all that. And we are embracing some of the work that GIA has supported in reframing aging because we think it's vitally important to change the conversation. The other one I'll point out is number 9, which is, you know, we call this become the Silicon Valley for innovative technology and products and services related to aging. This is really our way of saying, given the economy we have here and the assets we have here, and academia and research and life sciences in the innovation sector, why can't we point some of that toward the longevity economy? So that was a very strong recommendation of the council. And the other one I'll point out for you is the second one. I don't know if other states have this, but in Massachusetts, we provide municipalities the opportunity to enter into a compact with the administration to work on shared priorities in various domains like the environment or transportation or the arts. This has been hugely popular with cities and towns, and in some cases there are small grants to support these efforts. And in every case, what happens is that the lieutenant governor visits the community and they celebrate the signing of the compact. So just a few months ago, we were able to add age and dementia-friendly initiatives to the list of items that municipalities can choose for the compacts. Next slide, please. So the first item in our blueprint was to actually declare Massachusetts as an age-friendly state. And this is, you know, to amplify what Massachusetts Nora said a minute ago. There was so much work being done in community, and it caught the attention of many, that it gave us the courage, and we felt we had the resources to take this on as a statewide effort. So the governor announced this less than a year ago, and last January we received a designation from AARP, and we are spending this year doing a plan so that we can articulate the specific initiatives and areas that we want to focus on. Next slide. So our work under this age-friendly plan honors the work that's already occurring in communities. As you've heard repeatedly, that's our foundation. And what we're really doing is trying to articulate the issues and initiatives that will strengthen the movement and work across the state, to remove barriers that might be present for cities and towns, to embed aging in all policies, and to deepen efforts in communities that might not have the same access to resources as others. So you'll see kind of the 6 pillars of the plan on this slide. Next slide, please. So I want to go back to where I started in this presentation, which is to talk a little bit about working across sectors and domains and collaboration. So we are so fortunate to have amazing and innovative partners here. This is an initiative that came out of the Governor's Council related to that, let's be the Silicon Valley of aging. Appreciating the desire to have purpose and be meaningfully engaged later in life, our partners at MIT, General Electric, and Benchmark Senior Living wondered what might happen if we crowdsourced ideas to reduce isolation and loneliness among older adults. And so the In Good Company Challenge was created. Feel free to learn more about it. There's a URL where you can get more information. And it's not too late to submit an entry. They are due later this month. And my final slide, I thought I would just spend a minute to acknowledge that we feel like we are moving at a warp pace, at a very fast pace. Could you just advance the slide, please? And we know we are bound to make some mistakes. But I thought, since there are likely other states on the phone who are thinking about doing this, that I would share a couple of things that we have learned in the way of takeaways and advice for those of you who might be embarking on this journey. First of all, having a backbone organization is critical. It's wonderful for state government to be engaged, as I am, but governors change, administrations change, priorities change. So having a backbone organization, I think, is key. I think we've distinguished ourselves by aligning goals across sectors. We're all pointing in the same direction. We might be taking slightly different paths to get there, but we're all working toward the same thing. We have tossed ideology out the window. We're really being guided by what communities want. If they want to start with dementia-friendly, go for it. That's great. If they want to start with age-friendly, that's fine. We like to say, take any on-ramp you want to this highway. Listening to people, you all know this, but it's worth reminding ourselves how important it is. To amplify a point that Massachusetts Nora made a few minutes ago, spread your resources to allow some efforts in early stage planning as well as implementation, and also to smooth resources so that communities that might have fewer of them can engage equally. I think it's important to move from talking and thinking to doing, and really important, I think, as we move on in this next phase, to document what works, measure outcomes, and share the data. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These have been wonderful presentations to provide us with a really comprehensive sense of what's going on and how both philanthropy and many other sectors can be involved. And we have an engaged group today and lots of questions. And I will go ahead and get started and see how many we can get to. So a question I'll ask to Nora OBrien-Suric first from New York State is, could you say a little bit more about the request for proposals process that you were talking about, and how is that going to work, and are there deadlines involved?
Oh, that's a great question, and I don't have a great answer for that yet. The RSA is being managed by the New York State Office for the Aging, and they're still in the process of tweaking that. And of course, we are working with them on finessing that. They're hoping to release it next month, I think October, and that we hope to be starting to make the selection by the end of the year, and then funding early next year. So this is really to start the funding in 2019, and that is when the New York Academy of Medicine is prepared to start initiating, their learning collaborative. So this is still in progress. So as soon as I have more information, I'd be more than happy to share it with my colleagues on this webinar.
Okay. A question that I'll then guide to Massachusetts Nora, but for everybody, is how is public health involved in this? How do you see the role of public health in this process? And do you have any specific examples of that?
So that's a great question. One of the things that we're really excited about is that, our senior program officer is co-leading a group that is led by the Massachusetts Department of Public Health to think about how to use resources that are being generated through long-term services and supports. And so, and maybe Robin, because she sits at that table, can describe specifically some of the things that they're thinking about. But it's having public health at the table is really important to ensure that we understand what's needed, but then also sitting at their table. Robin, did you want to talk about that?
No, I think that's right. You know, we thought a lot about frameworks when we started this work with the Governor's Council. And we looked at public health frameworks very explicitly because many of us, myself included, have spent our careers in healthcare, and that's what we know. And interestingly enough, while we think the public health aspect of this is enormously central and important, the group felt that working on more of a social justice kind of community change framework was a bit more expansive and could include health, but then also tap into the other determinants that, you know, people are increasingly talking about. But a year and a half ago, when we started this work, they were only beginning to come on the radar screen. So yes, I think it is about them being at our table, us being at theirs, and the work really being integrated.
Thanks very much. Several questions around this topic, so I'll try to put them together. It's basically, can this kind of movement work without the leadership of the governor? And a couple of them are around, you know, obviously we have an election coming up in many states coming up, and of course Massachusetts has already been through this. What happens when the governor changes? And other kinds of things. So talk a little bit more about the role of the governor specifically in this process. Let's start with Nora OBrien-Suric.
Well, I would like to say that the governor is important to us in New York State. It is important that the governor mentioned that he wanted age-friendly New York State to start in 2017. But Massachusetts has a great example of starting ahead without the governor, and then the governor coming on board. So I think, you know, it's depending on how you want to do it. If you can convince the governor up front, I think that makes it easier in some ways, because then you've got a mandate from the top to come down. But on the other hand, if you start with communities, you know, as what AARP is encouraging, you know, start the communities, show the rationale, show the reason why communities should be doing this and why the state should be picking up on this. I think that somehow that could also be a very strong argument to bring it back up to the top from the bottom. So I don't think it's any one way is better than the other. I think just, you know, go for it, jump in.
Nora, from Massachusetts, other things to add?
So the thing that I would add is that, number one, right, it's a constant working of the legislature and the grassroots organizations that care about this. What we're finding is that to engage folks like community development corps or local community health centers, that as we get buy-in from the bottom and push on the top, it becomes something that people start talking about. And so Robin alluded to this in her presentation. It was like we were getting results. We were seeing through the leadership of AARP, specifically focused on the World Health Organization framework. We were seeing in other states. I mean, I want to say that in New Hampshire, they didn't have that infrastructure, and so that grassroots infrastructure. And so what they did was similar to what New York is doing, except that without the governor, they started to talk about what could an age-friendly approach to the state look like. And so they, again, brought together cross-sector individuals who cared about the issue. And so I think that it goes back to this idea that not one size fits all, and that if you don't have the governor, you know, you might have the community. And I think that's a stronger place to start, because to John's point, governors come and go, but if you have a community that's committed to a particular issue, you're going to get sustainable movement, but also something that's that gets supported by a cross sector of community members.
Well, thanks so much. And let me turn to one more question, and then we'll probably need to bring it back to you, all of you, for your final comments. And I'm going to actually insert and answer part of this question myself. But the question, and there's actually a couple of these, about how can you do this if you can't do it at the state level? Is it possible to do this at the regional level, the county or multi-county level? And I do want to just point to folks to the fact that Grantmakers and Aging has been involved in this arena for quite a number of years now. And on our website, we have, under the initiatives tab, we have an age-friendly community section that has lots and lots of resources. Most of the places where we worked, we were working with the local regional council on governments. So they're called a whole variety of different things in various parts of the country, but that's a place where in some ways it makes a lot of sense to have efforts like this at the regional level, because they already have a lot of the planning activities and so forth. They're really good at getting elected officials to work together on issues that are important in the region and so on. So we have found that those were particularly useful backbone organizations, or glue organizations, as we was talked about before. But Robin, do you have any other suggestions for the more localized kind of work?
Well, yes. I mean, for me, the answer to the question is yes, absolutely. You can do it at a local and regional level. The state work is really an amalgamation of lots of local work, right? And ways to begin to even that out and to put resources in areas that haven't been able to do work, or to change policies at a state level. But, I think the richness of what's happened here and what will happen in New York is largely about what works locally or regionally. And we have a great example in Massachusetts. One of the earliest folks to the table was, and ironically, it is the county that shares the border with New York State, is the Berkshires. And they went at this as a county. And they have very durable, partnerships and some results. And so I think it's totally doable.
Other comments on that particular question? Okay. So I'm now going to return to our panelists and ask them for their final words of wisdom for everybody who is working on these issues or thinking about these issues. And Nora OBrien-Suric, we'll start with you.
Thank you, John. So 2 things that I would just like to add and to close with. We need to be able to demonstrate the benefit to the community, why age-friendly, and looking at the 8 domains and making them all age-friendly, why there's a benefit to all the sectors in the community, so the business sector, the philanthropic community, the government, and especially for all the citizens of all ages. So we need to be able to demonstrate that benefit however we want to define that. And second, and in addition to, we need to show the economic imperative for making communities age-friendly. Why would businesses want to do this? Will this increase their profit? What about healthcare costs? Will this decrease the cost of healthcare? Or maybe it's good public relations, that this is just a good thing to do to raise awareness for an age-friendly business or an age-friendly community. Robin mentioned the longevity economy, and I would just like to end with that, Robert Butler, the guru for geriatrics in this country, took an algorithm that I think you would know well, but he turned it inside out, and he said that health and longevity equal wealth. That if we invest in the health of an aging population, then we will actually create a wealthier community.
Thanks so much, Nora. And Nora Moreno Cargie.
Thank you,
John. So I think about this in two ways. Number one, we cannot do this work alone. I think that's, and you see this in all of the presentations and what we've been emphasizing today. It's this, it needs to be a collaborative effort. We all need to be pointing in the right direction. And I think that when we approach this work in an agnostic way, it's about vibrant, thriving, amazing, resilient communities. So I don't care what you call it. I just want these communities to work for everyone. And then it's a lyric of a Spanish song that I want to share. It says, it's from El Rey, which is this like the Spanish version of I Did It My Way. And it says, there's a line that says, no hay que llegar primero, pero hay que saber llegar. This idea that you do not have to get there first, but you have to be aware and conscious of how you're getting there.
Thank you so much. Robin?
That is a tough act to follow. So I think a little bit about, especially since I'm a creature of state government and people, come and go with administrative changes, I think a lot about the assets we're creating and what will endure and what will sustain on its own. So I think it's important to think about the value of creating culture and systems change, because once you change it, it is enduring. It's pretty darn hard to change it, so you might as well take advantage of it once you're there. I think about creating backbone organizations and collaborations and partnerships that will endure. I think about the trust that develops, once the transportation people in a community start to work with the human services people in a community, and how those newly forged relationships really do endure and create new paths and pathways that will support age-friendly. So I really think about the sustainability and durability of the relationships and partnerships and collaborations, and how far those will take us.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank, on behalf of Grantmakers and Aging and all of our audience, Nora OBrien-Suric of the Health Foundation of Western and Central New York, Nora Moreno Cargie of the Tufts Health Plan and the Tufts Health Plan Foundation, and Robin Lipson of the Office of the Massachusetts Executive Office for Elder Affairs, for all that they do in all their work to make life better for older people, not only in their states, but beyond. I also want to thank the John A. Hartford Foundation for their continuing support of this webinar series. We will make this presentation available to anyone who wishes to see it later, including both the slides and audio. There will be an email in a few days, but also you can always check our website to see how to select that presentation. We also hope that you will join us for our next webinar, which will take place on Monday, October 29th from 2 to 3 Eastern. This one will be on geriatric emergency departments, past, present, and future opportunities for engagement. And we'll highlight the work of West Health and the John A. Hartford Foundation to advance geriatric emergency care and age-friendly healthcare systems. And finally, I want to once again remember our friends who are facing some tough times down in the southeast of the United States. And I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.